Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Shifting Digital Experiences Within Retail Banking. I'm Ren, and I'll be coordinating this session today. Your panel is made up of MyLife Digital team and will be hosted by Mia Collins. She's one of our business development team. She is joined by Joe Riley, Product Director, and Andy Green, our lead technical consultant. Over to you, Mia.
Great, thank you, Ren. So today we're talking a lot about a topic that is at the front of a lot of people's minds. How do we get deeper and more meaningful relationships with our customers and really make the most of the data we hold about them? So going over the agenda today, we'll be going over some of the foundations and taking a look at where we're at today, and also what the expectations of the customers are and why that should be embedded into our digital strategies. We're also going to have a little look at some of the current challenges you may be facing and why it's more important than ever to set the foundations for trusting relationships with your customers, and ultimately how personalisation drives growth. This is the reason to go deeper with your customers and to grow your opportunities. So here's the way that we've previously seen banking and finance, with less of a one-to-one experience and more mass-marketed approaches in promoting accounts, credit cards and products. Everything we saw was mass-marketed, and if you cast a wide net, it became very much about those transactions. And that's how we've historically received these communications. In the future, we really expect to see these connections with your customers in a much more humanised approach, where focusing on long-term relationships is prioritised. This requires real-time engagement and aligning your recommendations with the goals and aspirations that your customers have for themselves. But right now we're in this middle ground on a journey from A to B, where the transition from mass marketing is turning into a singular 360-degree view of each customer. We want all banks today to be on this journey, and it's important that we recognise it as an ever-evolving continuum. We're seeing features from Point B offered with some fintech and high innovation banks, and other banks implementing shifts to compete and move forward. What we want to do is to help you achieve that move and get you to where you want to be. It's a bit harder for this shift to be implemented successfully sometimes when the general public believe banks do not work in the best interest of UK society. YouGov actually conducted a study in which only 20% of those surveyed do trust their banks. Now, it's hard to pinpoint exactly why this is the case for so many people, but perhaps it's due to the perception banks face today. Banking is a function, and we bank because we have to, not because we want to. And that's where it starts to feel like a chore. Joe, with your experience in finance, how have you seen this transition carried out, if at all?
I think for me, Mia, where I've seen it work well is where organisations focus on customer journeys. I think, like you say, there's some transactional elements, and I think there's a journey in that where people want to be able to do something quickly if it is, in their eyes, very transactional. And then there's a more complex transaction. So if you think about the likes of mortgages or fixed term deposits, that's where it's a bigger transaction for the customer. It's more complex. And I think where I've seen it work well is where you take a customer lens on that journey and start to look at how you explain what a customer's going to go through on that journey and give them transparency. So you're very clear at the outset what's required through the journey, how long it's like to take, who you'll be dealing with, set really clear expectations, and then also allow the customer to directly see where you're at in that journey. And that's twofold, I suppose. It's really beneficial for the customer. They feel more engaged, it's more transparent, and they often feel like the bank is on their side. But also from a bottom line perspective, it helps the organisation because they get fewer queries into the bank, and that helps the cost to serve on that. So I think, the mortgages example is a good one where I've seen it work well. And I was involved in a process where we took that customer view, we defined that, and then we researched and surveyed the customers through that journey. So we actually understood their perception of that journey as well. So we could tweak it based on their view of the service that we were delivering. And that did build a level of trust that they felt like we were on the journey with them. And it was about delivering a goal. With a mortgage, it's getting someone into the home, which they really want. So it becomes less transactional about taking out a mortgage and more about achieving your your personal life goals, and in this case, achieving home ownership. So that's one example where I've seen it work well.
Great, thank you, Joe. So why these next numbers are really important is that it highlights the severity and scope of the lack of trust within the industry. This webinar is going to try and pinpoint exactly how you can make this a turning point and start to regain and build trust with your customers. The first stats we're going to take a look at now are really relevant to the conversation today, in that recently we have seen there are two sides to the modern consumer. People are demanding personalised experiences, but simultaneously don't trust organisations with their data. This naturally causes a few issues to arise in the way you provide services to your customers. There has been a rapid change in the ways that we regulate our relationships with banks, and you can now do everything from your phone without having to actually speak to or see anyone. The human element has been removed with branches closed and replaced with faceless apps and a disconnected experience. The shift in digitalisation has of course created new ways of working and an emphasis on innovative ways of communicating with your customers. It's now very much a transactionalised space. The human element has been taken away for the most part, aside from those who still wish to come into a branch for larger and more complex things. The shift in digitalisation is going to continue to shapeshift and evolve, so it's important we start to plan for the future and predict what customers are going to expect from you. When we look at the customer journey, we think about every interaction banks would make with their customers and every possible touch point. And we ask, is there the opportunity to build trust in every one of these interactions? A really interesting survey that was conducted by Invoca was on the state of the consumer banking experience. And the aim was to understand how customers' interactions with a bank or financial institution was reflected in their financial decisions. What they found was that despite huge investments in digital advertising, consumers rely heavily on offline interactions. Not only this, but 45% of those surveyed had said that they had seen digital ads which conflicted with conversations they had had over the phone. This conflict in message, potentially as a result of a complex data landscape and a non-centralised customer view, can lead to confusion about what the customer really wants from you. As a result, it's critical you have all of your touch points regulated within one repository so that your message is consistent and in line with what they want from you. However, the same surveyed customers still expected a seamless experience when switching between these touch points. It's proving more and more challenging for banks to provide the levels of personalisation with the varying communication channels you have and limited customer data that you receive. This is also increasingly challenging due to the lack of unified data, poor attribution, and incomplete MarTech stacks. If our banks fail to keep up with the demands of today's mobile consumer, they will struggle. Whereas if they unify the customer experience across all channels, they'll start to see a considerable advantage. It's brought to light the need for banks to think beyond digital, and that misinvesting in digital at the expense of offline communications can be a mistake. Financial institutions today can improve these experiences by focusing on creating seamless and personalised experiences at every point and connecting interactions like phone calls to the rest of the digital customer journey. Having a connected experience is massively noted and recognised as being an important factor of their journey from the perspective of the customer, and this is represented in the latter part of Invoca's study, where 75% of those surveyed say it's extremely important to be able to switch easily between channels when interacting with their bank. And it's really hard to facilitate a streamlined experience without having the correct technology in place. So we're now going to take a look at some of the particular issues you may have faced or are facing currently. Firstly, legacy systems are an inhibitor to the technical aspirations of banks, with almost half of bankers seeing legacy systems as the biggest barrier of the growth of commercial banks. It is apparent that there are two main reasons for this. Firstly, the legacy systems and processes you have in place have previously provided you with stability and security. You trust them. Secondly, the risk aversion from making this change is huge. Having been built on monolithic architecture, these changes in systems require a great deal of impact and work. Implementing new systems and processes to capture the consent of your customers can be really challenging and seem like a really big change, which a lot of the time it is. Andy, what do you think the biggest challenge is when transitioning from using legacy systems?
So for me, the biggest challenge around this area is needing to look at the whole system in entirety. What we find a lot of our use cases come down to is when collecting and engaging with the customer, we typically only need to review a few of the systems in order to make some key changes in order to get moving. So whenever we undertake projects with clients, we always try and look at the whole ecosystem and then boil it down to just a few systems where we can make the most impact and drive change through customer engagement in a small subset before expanding out wider. So start small and grow big.
Okay, great, thank you. So secondly, moving forward from historic customer perceptions can be really challenging. I've actually had a couple of conversations with some finance professionals from across different industries, and I've asked the same question each time. Do you trust your bank? And what can be done to regain your trust? And the consensus I've had back is that the lack of transparency about exactly what data is held, what your intentions are with it, and how you intend to use it to provide a better experience aren't always communicated. On a personal level, I can be quite particular with who I trust, and I think that's just natural human instinct. It's easy for this trait to be carried over to other areas of our lives. Team, what do you think about this? Would you say you're trusting with the information you provide?
I think for me, I'm trusting once I build a relationship with a bank or an organisation. So I think for me, it's some of the smaller things which organisations can do to start to build trust and engage a customer. When I was working in the banking industry, we looked at what people were trying to achieve through mobile and internet banking, and actually 5 of the top 10 things which they were asking for, we already had within our systems. And for us, it was about engaging with those customers to start to show that we were sort of on their side. So we spoke to them about the things that they were trying to achieve and how they could achieve them, and showed them how to do that. And that's the start of that trust journey. And once you do those smaller things, then you start to build trust around the use of data, and people are probably willing to share a bit more. So I think it is a journey on trust, and it's often getting the small things right at the start of that journey with customers helps.
And just for me on that, Joe, I'd take that further. I'd say customer engagement, you're completely right. Getting the right message to the people at the right time. So recently I took out a new account with my bank, and I went into the branch to do so. Little did I know that their processes had changed, and I could actually do this online nowadays. So I could have actually saved myself time and effort and cost in going into the bank myself and doing that. So I think you're completely right about the customer engagement piece.
Interestingly, I'm quite trusting of what data my banks, and there are more than one, hold on me. Again, that could be because I worked in a building society, so I'm quite aware of how much information they hold, and also how segmented it is in terms of who can actually access a lot of that information. There are obviously quite strict rules on that segmentation of access piece. But then that said, and I just alluded to it, I use multiple banks. So I've got my traditional retail bank for my bills, but then my spending money is in my Monzo account. And that's mainly because Monzo gives me what I need in a day-to-day banking context.
Great, thank you, team. And Ren, that brings me really well to my next issue, where we talk a lot about the customer journey. And it's actually hard not to compare the service we receive from the challenger banks, such as Monzo or Starling Bank, as especially millennials today expect you to know them, as this is the experience they receive elsewhere. They know what they want, and they want valued advice and to know where they're at. Customers are demonstratively fine with you having their data as long as you disclose it, tell them what you want to do with it, and make sure you let them know its purpose if it really is to provide a better service for them. But in doing this comes a complexity to the data landscapes. Through the use of challenger and open banks, there's an inconsistency in the consents that are captured. and aligning these consents into an auditable trail is proving challenging as a result, which can cause frustration and consent confusion for your customers. So where we can start to fix these headaches. Now, the growth and rapid evolving in digitalisation then creates an issue when serving the customers from an organisational perspective. Everyone is looking to achieve digital transformations, yet are having issues with the complex and largely evolved data landscapes. Firstly, considering the complexity of technology within these data landscapes and the increase in customer touchpoints, it can be really challenging to align and connect this information whilst ensuring its quality isn't deterred. It's the transition from the current legacy systems you have in place to a more data-friendly environment, which combines all relevant information and permissions to allow your communications to be streamlined, optimised, and relevant to that individual. Moving on, the regulatory landscape has evolved significantly in the last few years, what with MiFID, PSD2, and of course GDPR, and will continue to change in the future. With evolving regulations, your customers have a higher privacy awareness now more than ever. This, as we know, is highlighted with the continuous requests for consent on multiple touchpoints, which ultimately can lead to consent fatigue. To avoid getting your customers to this point, consent requests, combined with the obligation of transparency, aims to give back control to the individuals over the use of their personal data. They have to reasonably understand why their information is to be collected, its purpose, and who will access it, and also the amount of information that is exchanged. The focus should be centred on improving transparency rather than requesting systematic consents. Improving transparency helps to build trust, and if this information is displayed and communicated clearer elsewhere, this puts you at risk of losing trust completely and potentially losing a customer. Finally, there's a great deal of pressure on banks to retain customers as your customers become more aware of their own privacy rights, and therefore implementing a sophisticated system so you can generate that single customer view in a compliant and regulated manner will be a huge competitive advantage. Now, to bring these theories to light, we're going to pass over to Andy, who's going to provide us with a short demonstration of Concentric.
Thank you very much, Mia. So what the team did this week was ask me to put together a presentation specific to the banking sector to touch on all of these needs. So how do we drive customer engagement by collecting consent and permissions and customer preferences across complex data landscapes and making sure that we adhere to evolving regulations. So what I'm going to be presenting today is the Concentric platform by MyLife Digital, and the goal of this platform is to drive customer engagement whilst ensuring regulatory compliance. But before I do this, what I just wanted to do is run you through a common landscape that we find ourselves deploying into. So a common integration for Concentric is we know that we're collecting consent from all around a customer's digital estate, whether it be from internal staff, which might be using Salesforce or Dynamics or any CRM you can think of, including old legacy systems. We make sure that internal staff can manage and collect consent, as well as customers being able to maintain and manage their own consent through customer registration pages, my account pages, and unsubscribe links. What we also do as well is give really cool tools to allow customers to better engage with organizations. And as well as collecting data from both of these sides, we know that it's critical that all internal systems are connected together when it comes to consent and preference management, and that when sending out communications through email service providers like HubSpots, MailChimps, or all that you can think of, this data is coordinated and the customer permissions, the subscriptions and preferences are all being upheld. So as I say, this is quite a small diagram. We range from doing very complex integrations to very small integrations. but all with the same goal around driving customer engagement. Okay. So what I want to do is run this demo through a fictitious bank called the Royal Bank of Bath. And as you can see on the screen here, I'm currently on Ryan Jones's contact record. So before everybody got to this point, we would typically work with a variety of teams at an organization. So the compliance teams, marketing teams, IT teams, in order to set a consent framework and preferences framework, which allows organizations to be granular about the permissions they're requesting in order to make sure that there's a value exchange between them and the end customer. So in this banking example, I've got a few different setups here. So the Royal Bank of Bath might communicate to us by email, by SMS, post, and phone in the normal ways. But on these channels, they might also break it down into certain topics or products or services that they provide, so that customers, given the choice, can opt in or out of some, all, or none. And given this setup, we can make sure that customers get what they want. So you can see here that the Royal Bank of Bath might contact you by email for general marketing purposes. We might also send you emails on our product rate promise, which could say that whenever a product comes out which has got a preferential interest rate, we'd like to notify the client or the customer to let them know that they could do better, they could do more with their information, and they could save or make money. We might also send them communications on when they enter their arranged overdraft, so that they know when they're coming into incurring fees, or when any scheduled payments for overdrafts might take them over their overdraft limit. So all this is designed to do is set up preferences, permissions, in order to allow the customer to hear exactly what they want to hear about. So along the same lines as of communication preferences, customers also often use their devices nowadays, like their mobile devices, to do all their banking. So it's very key that we offer the level of granularity, not only across a single channel, but across different channels as well. So it might be that we send mobile app push notifications out to the mobile wallet. So anytime I make a transaction, the customer can control whether they see that information on their phone or not. So other ways that we can use consent and preferences, we might also personalize some of the content on our mobile apps by analyzing customer data and customer trends to make sure that we're displaying them the right offers or the right products at the right time, and allowing the customer to opt in or out of that, and show that you're doing that so that the customer is receiving a beneficial product or a beneficial service by allowing you to analyze their data to serve them the right messages. Again, can be really good, but you can give the customer the ability to turn that off should you wish. And finally, another one of the areas that we look strongly at is data sharing with other organizations. So obviously open banking is quite big in the banking world right now. So being able for a customer to be able to control who you share your data with, or their data with, is very key. So we can also manage permissions around third-party data sharing too. So it could be that Ryan Jones calls me up one day and says, you know what, I don't want to receive emails from you anymore. What the call center agent could do in this case is say, oh, what type of emails do you not want to receive? Do you not want, I understand that you might not want to receive our marketing emails, but there are other emails that we send that could be of great benefit to you, such as our product rate promise, which gives you details of better rates, and they might choose to opt into that. And they might also choose to opt into the arranged overdraft emails and the scheduled payment emails too, because they're giving him value in this case. So when saving any customer permission changes, for compliance, we make sure we save some critical information. This being the channel, how did the customer request a change over the phone, the privacy policy that's in force, so making sure that the customer fully understood how we would be using their data, and the permission statement. And this permission statement is the piece of text that's presented or phone script that's read to a customer when they come to make a change. So if I just complete those changes and sticking to the compliance point, one of the key things around managing permissions and managing consent is the audit trail. So knowing what the customer requested, at what time, and when they did so. So you can see here that the customer at 11:36 requested these changes. And not only that, but you can see who also made the changes. So I made the changes and how the customer requested the change. So over the phone, the privacy policy was that I recorded, and the permission statement that the text or the script that was presented to them was just that here. So finally, on the customer side, on the call center side, there's also the notion of preferences. So what we can do is work with organizations to set up appropriate preferences so that they can choose, things such as whether they receive paperless statements or their marketing channel preference, really simply and really easily and all centralized into one place. So moving on to the customer side and how they might interact with the consent piece, we might send an email to the customer using the product rate promise consent, which they'd previously opted into, to send them this email to say that there might be a few accounts that might be of interest to them. And Ryan in this case might say, you know what, I want to unsubscribe from this. So Ryan's going to unsubscribe from that email topic. Now, what we can do now that we're Ryan is on our own pages, on the Royal Bank of Bath pages, we can set up the concentric components to allow the capture of consent for that piece, and all centralized back to the same data source. So what we can do here with the customer is show the value that they receive from being opted in. So unlike the call center side, we can be very clear. So the customer's currently opted into product rate promise emails, and you can clearly see underneath the value that they get from being opted into those. So that gives the customer the choice as to whether to opt in or out. And should the customer choose to opt out, we can further ask them to say, are you sure? Do you want to miss out on this key piece of information? Because there could be some real value to you in staying on this. So in this case, it could be a way that they could save more money or make money. So if I just make that change and save that, so Ryan's now opted out of the product rate promise emails. If I come back to his record within our CRM system, within our internal systems, and look at the history of what the customer's requested, you can see at 11:39 the customer opted out of the product rate promise emails. So all good stuff there, all nice and centralized. So in this case, Ryan just went to opt out of the product rate promise emails. But what he might want to do is manage all of his email preferences. And we allow and we give the flexibility to set it up so that just by clicking a link, Ryan can come through and see the transparency about all the ways we might contact him by email. So in this case, as well as the product rate promise communication, we might also email him about general products and service emails, as well as those entering arranged overdraft and scheduled payments exceeding limits in your overdraft emails. So again, we can be transparent, gain the trust of the customer, and make sure that they're engaged to know exactly how we're using their information through the bank. So another typical place that customers will come on to manage their email preferences or permissions or any of their permissions, in fact, is through the My Account area. So what you typically see in My Accounts or portal areas of sites is the ability to manage much more permissions and much more consent and many more preferences at a granular level, over and above what you typically get from an email unsubscribe piece. So in this manage preferences area, we might have the options for them to change whether they receive paperless statements or not. still see what product and service marketing permissions they have, but see this across the different channels like the post, SMS, and calls channels that they have. Over above that, you can see all the extra permissions down here, and also the third-party consent permission too there. So one of the key things organizations do when configuring their consent framework is they get it 90% right, but they need it to be adaptable and changeable, so that when their business needs change, or when they introduce a new feature or product, that they need to be available to the customer and for the customer to give consent to, we can do that easily with the customer. So everything I've shown you from the customer side, is actually used using a content template on Concentric, and this content template drives what's actually shown to the customer. So it could be the Royal Bank of Bath decide that they want to make mobile app push notifications and send mobile app push notifications about marketing. So what I could do is just come on and add this into my configuration, to my consent configuration, and then make it directly available to my customers. So the Royal Bank of Bath are going to want to send me emails, and if I just add the purpose of marketing in here and add that away, I'll set that to active and make sure that I'm going to be claiming consent for that. And when the customer gives me consent, I'll say will be valid for 2 years before needing to reconsent. If I add that in, great, that's added to my configuration. You can see that in here. But then we can also make that available to our customers. So I'm going to make that available on the My Account Preferences page. And I'm going to make that available just in this area here, below where they'd opt in to email marketing. So if I add this in, so we'll add app push notifications. And if I select that, so app push notifications, whichever marketing, just there. If I add that in and save it away, now when the customer comes in and logs onto the My Account area again, you can currently see that only emails is available there before I come onto the page again. And now I can collect consent for not only emails, but also app push notifications. And finally, what I want to show you is our next piece of next best consent. So this customer, Ryan Jones, we know isn't currently opted into marketing emails or our product rate promise email. And what we can use our next best consent tool to do is, where we don't have consent given by the customer, we can show and allow capture of consent through pop-ups to say, so that we can always try and reach out to that customer a little bit more and ask them to say for their consent, so that they can gain more and more value from us as a bank. So what you can see here is just that. So currently Ryan's not opted into marketing emails or our product rate promise emails. So when navigating around our website and landing on certain pages, we can pop this up to him. So Ryan might opt in this case to general marketing emails. And now when he does, if he were to come back to this page, then we wouldn't ask him the same question again. So you'll see, and I'll just go through this. When I've saved this and when I reload the page, this informative product and service emails option will go, and our product promise emails will be the only question we'll ask on this page. So a great way of increasing your opt-in rates and engagement with customers. So great, that's all being saved. Now, when I refresh this page, as I said, the customer will now only see this one option.
I think the bit I'd add there, Andy, as well is I was involved in a program where we kind of went on this journey where we were trying to improve our email consent capture rates, to improve engagement with customers and look for additional marketing opportunities. And I think in the banking sector, where you've got high levels of customers logging in to do various things through mobile and internet banking, it's a great opportunity here as they log in to present this kind of consent capture. And I think recent survey by McKinsey, 80% of customers were logging into either mobile or internet banking once a month. So customers are coming to these areas, and I think here it's nice that if you've already got the consent, you're not creating consent fatigue and asking for that again. But if there's elements which you haven't got captured, you've got the choice to then load these dialogue and capture boxes at various points. So it's quite nice that it sits within that digital journey the customer's on anyway.
That's great, thanks, Jay. So just to wrap up, hopefully what I've shown and demonstrated there is different ways of engaging your customer and collecting consent across all your different touch points around banking ecosystem, and then finally the compliance piece around making sure that any consent change is audited, logged, and timestamped to make sure that we're covered from a regulatory standpoint. Sorry, Ren, just before we move on to Q&As, there was one more piece I wanted to cover. So having been on a webinar earlier this week, one of the points came from one of our customers actually around why they chose to look at us and implement Concentric, and it was really interesting feedback. So what they said was that they wanted people involved in the project and involved in this piece who dedicate their lives to it. And what they really appreciate about Concentric is the standardization that we brought to the whole project and the whole consent framework that made it easy for their teams to sign off and know that they could maintain this going forward in a really simple fashion and across, again, all of their touch points. And one of the key pieces about this project actually, and it's actually millions of customers on this project, was how quick it was to implement, because they needed to implement the whole solution from start to finish within a 12-week timescale. And importantly, finally, on the customer engagement side, typically before they implemented Concentric, they would see 4 to 6% opt-in rates on email channels. And after implementing Concentric, they were seeing closer to 30. So they saw a real return on investment there in terms of the number of opt-ins, which they could then tie back to how much a marketable customer was worth to them, which was really key information. Sorry, Red, back to you.
No worries. We have a few questions. So Andy, how do you track and measure these opt-in rates?
Tracking the opt-in rates is a really good question, actually. So far, we've worked with organizations on a bespoke manner. So mainly because we wanted to make sure that they got the metrics that were key to them. So this last example that I talked about on the email opt-in front, having that key metric was really key to them. But now what we've actually found is that a lot of our customers have the same requirement. And so we're actually productizing this, and we're coming up and putting some KPIs into our product to make sure that everyone can benefit from what we can see.
Very nice. I have another question. How do you strike the balance between data quality and quantity when targeting existing customers? And is this a good time to review marketing preferences? Joe?
It's a good question, Ren. I think for me, the balance between quantity and quality, it's probably looking at what you'll do with the information. So the volume that you need to be able to inform the decisions that you're looking to make, and that's going to vary across each organization. I think depending on where you're at with customers and the maturity of those customers, how much information you already hold, whether you can actually understand customer behavior from some of the transactional interactions that the customer has as well. So it'll probably depend on each organization, but it's probably looking at the quantity, the critical quantity that you need to make decisions to help inform whether it be customer journeys or certain decisions that you're looking to make. is now a good time. I think there's quite a lot of messaging, I suppose, at the moment, and has been over the last month or so around COVID. So it's quite a noisy space. I think if you can ask it in the right way, but not ask too much. So it's probably the relevance of the ask as well to the journey that the particular customer's on. And I suppose jumping back to the next best consent box that Andy showed, what I quite like about that is that you can integrate the ask into the journey as well. So it might be that someone's come in and completed a particular interaction which they're trying to achieve, and then you could display a preference or a consent ask at the end of that journey. So it's probably trying to connect the ask to a journey so it doesn't feel too imposed on the particular customer.
Cool. And one final question. What is the typical implementation timeframe for Concentric?
So typical implementation time, it really depends on the landscape that we're about to implement into. So I've recently been on a project which we've gone from 0 to 100 in about 2 weeks elapsed time. But typical time is between 2 weeks and 3 months.
Thank you.
The bit I'd probably add to that, Ren, is I think the Concentric side can be quite quick. It's probably just that integrating some of those components that Andy's shown today and into some of the downstream systems. So I think that's why the range, it's relatively broad range there. But on the Concentric side, we can make the components available and make the platform available very quickly.
Thank you. We have no further questions, so thank you for joining us. I look forward to seeing you all soon. Goodbye.
Thanks, Ren.